On the program today, we're going to focus on a very topical issue here in West Africa that deals with every country in the region, of course, if on a global scale. I'm talking about this Ebola virus that has had every government, every nation talking about how best to address it. And of course, we know that in spite of the fact that it's affected political and the social scene, it's also affected the financial aspects of most economies as well, particularly the countries worst hit. We know Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea are the three West African countries that have been most hit, and very recently Nigeria. So on the program today, we're going to look at that. And of course, other developments in terms of intra and inter-regional trade in West Africa. I'm being joined on the program by the chairman, Export Group of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Obiora Madu, and Mr. Alfred Uweraka. He is the CEO, Fryjay Consult, and he's also an agri exporter. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Obiora, let's start with you. Let's talk about trade in the West African region. How's it been like in the last half year?
Intra-African trade generally, and then intra-ECOWAS trade has been on the low side compared to what is happening, because regionalization starts with integrating trade within the region and then improving trade between that region and other regions. Generally, across Africa, it's less than 11%. So ECOWAS is not better than that. So it's a major issue, of course, which is currently being compounded by things that are going on. In the last 6 months, it has not been different from what it's, but currently, as we speak, changes.
Positive or negative changes now?
Negative changes, obviously, arising from a lot of things happening, the Ebola issue, the closing of borders, restriction of flights. So, of course, naturally, if the intra-West African trade was low, now that you have these borders are being closed, movements are being restricted, is so many. In fact, I had put on Facebook that I'm appearing on this program. Someone sent a message, and his first concern was that the hunters were no longer selling because of the fear of bushmeat. But generally, the economies of nations, just like you said earlier in the program, that the World Bank said both Kenya and the rest of them shrinking from 4.5 to 3.5. It's not a joke. And you're also going to see so many economies running increased deficit budgeting. Okay,
so before we get to all of the reasons why we're presently seeing what we're seeing now, what actually caused the reduction in intra-region and intra-ECOWAS trade before we saw this this upsurge in the fear of spreading the Ebola virus across the borders?
I think one of the major challenges is actually issues of payments and the strength of economies. If you ask a lot of people who trade within the West African region, it's always the idea of you take your goods. It's like on consignment basis. You drop your goods, they say, come back in 2 weeks' time for your money. Of course, if you come back in 2 weeks' time, it's either your money or the consignment, or the part that has been sold and the part that has not been sold. So that has not been. And then the ECOWAS Commission is trying, but they need to do a lot more to improve. But the point is, the strength of those economies. In some of the economies we're talking about, nobody can issue a letter of credit for $100,000, not to talk about 501 million. So you can't even talk about the usual methods of payment which is used elsewhere. It's always crossing the border with goods and all that. So there's a lot that needs to be done within the region if we want trade to improve.
Mr. Uweraka, I know I've had you on the program very recently, but let's talk about exports within the ECOWAS region and within the West African region. How's it been like in the last couple of, let's say, in the last quarter?
Well, I must say that signals we're getting indicate that this is an aspect of the business that can easily collapse and people will not notice it. Like rightly said, the volume that is moving within the inter-regional borders is being relatively low, and with control measures going on all over the countries. This has been traumatic because a lot of the countries are beginning to look at their businesses a lot more now. You must have heard about the experience Ghana is going through. And for the first time, Ghana is beginning to go through some bit of challenges in power and all that. They begin to dovetail in the business you do. And the control measures in some of those countries is that they are worried about Nigerians. Nigerians go to those territories and they are being told these are restrictions you must take. So over time, the business volume has not really taken the lead. What you have now is mostly illegal trade, which you can't capture. So I would think that it hasn't been too wonderful. In fact, all effort to make it wake up, like recently, monetary policies are becoming challenging in those countries. We discussed off camera that most of the things you say about ECOWAS trade is running on top of finance and quality of what you export to those countries. And of course, logistics is there. But key value is that what are you exporting? Can you do it legally? Or you remain void? You go to these countries, most of the people live in Nigeria. I find those ECOWAS countries, but not the other way around. These are the things you notice. So countries like us suffer the brunt a lot more. And I think we have to look at it. There have been so many commissions, the ECOWAS Business Forum and all that. It's been like a talk show. Or where are the actors? So it's more of a deliberate policy by the export group to see to it that we can make a lot more within the group because we share the same type of affinity, water, terrain, and all that. So it's been very tough. It's not been too good at all.
Okay, now let's talk about how much of this this fear of the Ebola virus spreading across the borders has also affected exports. Let's look at from where you come from, which is agricultural exports. How much of this has really affected? Because we know that in the space of less than a month since this worrisome trend started here in Nigeria, we've seen a lot of jitters, and like you rightly mentioned, some countries bordering Nigeria have closed their borders to Nigerians coming in. So could you just tell us the level of activities, or how much have we had trade in terms of agricultural exports or any form of trade between Nigeria and most of those countries that we border with?
I think it would be too early to give you figures, since this Ebola issue was just a recent development. But by and large, we have had a little bit of drop, almost 10% in what we bring in from those countries to add to our value chain. So if you look at the micro level, you find that Greek is heavily affected because they are not able to lift your products. Even with the same country we are talking about, not much is being got from places where we lift product because everybody is afraid. And that fear is more of the major challenge we have. Not that I don't want to act. You will recall that some people who came from the West Coast, when they arrived, we equally suspended immediately that they are coming from an Ebola-driven environment. So these are signals that tells you that in a very short time, some of those smaller countries on the West Coast are going to have real problem because they've been relying on a volume that we have here in Nigeria. With the 150 million people, you can imagine not taking cow coming from Cote d'Ivoire, not taking, like we bring in prawns from some of the ECOWAS countries here, and we don't take. They can't export it from their countries. So these are things that will manifest, and I can assure you, if this persists for another quarter, we're going to find a major change in the way we do business. Either we begin to look for import and export outside the region, or we still manage what we have. Like people say, take what you have. Don't rely on what coming from other countries.
Mr. Madu, do you want to add to this?
Yes, I think it's expected. When movements are beginning to be restricted, flights are being restricted, then of course this is bound to happen. Just like he said, people bring in products from other West African countries for value addition and export. Now that is very, very difficult. I was reading up a material, banana farmers in Guinea who had the opportunity to be exporting their banana before now are throwing away banana on a daily basis. As it arrives, they throw it away because nobody wants to touch it. One, monkeys eat banana. They are scared of fruits. And then, of course, it is an Ebola region. So they believe that there's Ebola in the banana. A lot of items that used to move across the region can no longer move. We pray that it is possible to contain this, because if it's extended a little more, the economies are going to suffer. I mean, even before Ebola, just imagine at the time there was an issue and the border between us and Benin Republic was shut. Because some of these economies are depending on the Nigerian economy. 2 weeks after, practically there was nothing happening at that end, to the extent that their president came here to meet our president and the border was open and then life was bubbling again.